You should never do an automatic transmission flush. You should never not do an automatic transmission flush. You should also never say never. Hey do-it-yourselfers, so as evident by the comment section on my previous video where I told you how you can best maintain your car, it's obvious that there's a lot of confusion about when or if you should flush your automatic transmission. So there's a yes and no and a maybe answer to this question, and I got 3 of my cars with different mileage and different maintenance history on them, which should allow me to explain this more thoroughly. So basically today we will have some answers regarding this question. Now before we start, do me a favor and subscribe to my channel, but also click on the bell notification that's right next to the subscribe button, because YouTube will not let you know when a new video is out unless you click on that. So first, let's talk about when you should never flush your automatic transmission fluid, or in fact even replace any of your automatic transmission fluid. And that's when your car currently has automatic transmission issues. So yeah, if your transmission is already slipping, maybe kicking into gear or changing gears when it's not supposed to, flushing the transmission fluid or replacing any of the transmission fluid is only going to make it worse. And that's for 2 reasons. One being that maybe your transmission is slipping because the clutch packs are worn out. Now, if the clutch packs are worn out beyond a certain point, it also means that the old clutch material is also still floating in the transmission fluid, and at the same time it's still helping a little bit with your clutch packs engaging and connecting. Now, if you take the old transmission fluid out, put new transmission fluid in there, the new transmission fluid is not going to have that gritty old clutch material in it, and your transmission is actually going to start slipping even more. And the other reason is all transmission fluids come with additives. Now, some of these additives have cleaning characteristics for obvious reasons. They want to make sure that your transmission can pretty much clean itself out. Whether a part is wearing out, it wants to be able to collect those particles, get it to the oil pan area where it can be collected by your transmission fluid filter. Now, the problem is when you put new fluid in there with new additives, it's going to do a really good job, but it's going to clear out crud and particles from one corner and move them maybe to another corner, or clean out a very old dirty transmission and all of a sudden clog things up, and then you're going to have more problems, not less problems. Now, you can pretty much verify a transmission that has internal problems by checking your transmission fluid. So yeah, you remove your transmission oil dipstick and smell the fluid. Now, people say if it smells burnt, it's a bad sign, but in my experience, it just smells really awful, as in you smell it and, you know, that happens, you bump your head against the hood. Now, the other sign is if you have really dark transmission fluid. Now, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this, but this transmission fluid is in really good shape. It's not dark at all, and it looks pretty close to a new transmission fluid. Now, as you know, new transmission fluid is supposed to look pink, but in small amounts on your skin, it'll actually look pretty clear. Now, pretty much the only choice you have with a transmission that's kicking and slipping, and you'll verify that it's an internal issues, is to remove 1 quart of transmission fluid from your transmission and add 1 quart of Lucas stop slip transmission oil to your transmission. Cross your fingers and hope for the best. And unfortunately, that rarely works as well, because when a transmission fails due to an internal components like the clutch packs being physically damaged and worn out, no amount of transmission fluid flushes or fluid replacements is going to fix that. Your only bet is to add that Lucas oil, and maybe that oil will either clean something out or add a bit more grit, and hopefully your clutch packs can engage easier. All right, now another situation where you should not do a transmission flush is to get your transmission flushed at a shop. Because if you do it at a shop, they use a machine that they've used on hundreds of cars, and they remove your transmission lines usually and hook that machine up to your transmission lines. Now, hooking that machine up to where your transmission cooler lines go in itself is not a problem, but the problem is that they use that machine again on hundreds of cars before they got to your car. Now, that machine might have a different type of automatic transmission fluid, or worse yet, have dirt and debris and worn out material from the previous transmission they serviced. And if that gets inside your transmission, it's going to cause even more problems. Also, another problem is some of these shops use additives to either add with the new transmission fluid to your transmission or use it to clean out your transmission. And in my opinion, those cause more problems than necessary. Your normal transmission fluid, again, has cleaning additives that should be adequate. All right, so that should cover when to never do a transmission flush. Now let's go on and move to when you can do a transmission flush. So that brings us to my 2001 Dodge Ram with about 61,000 miles on the clock. But it doesn't have just low miles. It also has, and that's for a fact because I did it myself, known record when it comes to maintaining the transmission. When I bought this car about 1.5 years ago, it had just above 50,000 miles, I think, and that's when I decided to do a transmission fluid flush. And if we were to check the transmission fluid on this truck, again, you can hopefully see that the fluid on this truck is also in nice, clean shape. So yeah, if we were to do a transmission fluid flush on this truck with the known maintenance records and no problems with the transmission on this car, nothing is going to happen due to the flush to the transmission on this car. Now, if you do decide to flush your transmission, make sure the manufacturer of your car doesn't prohibit that first. Second, I recommend that you do it earlier than the manufacturer gives the interval for replacing the fluid and filter, for example. You know, like on this truck, let's say it's every 50,000 miles for a fluid and a filter replacement. Make sure if you decide to not just do that, but also do a flush, to do it every 40,000 miles. This way, crud doesn't build up inside your transmission, and therefore, you know, all the new transmission fluid is not gonna knock that loose and plug things up. And here's a fun fact for you. On this transmission, if you were to replace the transmission fluid, you would have to drop the oil pan. Now, if you drop the oil pan and just replace the oil that's inside the oil pan, that's only about 2 quarts, where the entire transmission on this truck uses about 6 quarts. And that's obviously because a lot of that oil is inside your torque converter and other parts of the internals of your transmission, obviously. So yeah, on this car, the oil inside the pan, it's only about 1/3 of the transmission oil that your transmission uses. On some cars, it might be as high as 50 or 60%, and on some cars, it might be even as low as 1/4. Now, if you do decide to do a DIY transmission flush, here's how you do it. You first add a quart to your transmission through the dipstick tube. You then disconnect the transmission line that's coming from your transmission and takes oil to your transmission cooler. Add another hose to that and put the other end in a bucket. Then you get in your car, start the engine, and then put the transmission in neutral and watch the transmission pump out transmission fluid, and you stop the car when it pumps out about 1/4 of oil. And then you keep adding fluid 1 quart at a time through the dipstick, and then turn on the engine and use it to pump out the old transmission fluid through that hose. And you do this until clean transmission fluid comes out of that hose. And that's the only way to do a transmission flush. And again, it should be done on a car with the right qualifications. All right, so now let's get to the maybe part, or the maybe answer. And we'll use this car and this car. This being a 2009 Pontiac G3, this being a 2004 GMC Yukon. The Yukon has 190,000 miles, and I have no maintenance records on this car, but the transmission fluid, as we saw earlier, looks pretty good actually. Now, the Pontiac G3 has a dead battery, but take my word for it, it has 106,000 miles. And again, no maintenance records on this either. As far as the condition of the transmission fluid, well, let's see. All right. Yep, as you can see, it's kind of on the darker side. It is worn, but it doesn't smell bad or anything. All right, so when it comes to these two cars, I don't recommend doing a transmission fluid flush at all, because first, there is no maintenance records on this. For example, this car at 106,000 miles, it may never have had its transmission serviced. It may never have had either a flush or even a fluid and filter replacement. And now you put that new transmission fluid in there, it's gonna, you know, clean things out, knock things loose, get some dirt and debris from one corner, plug up something else, cause some problems that weren't there to begin with. And again, same thing goes for this truck, because again, we don't know the maintenance records on the transmission, and also given the miles, a transmission fluid flush is not recommended. However, these two cars are in the maybe section because, you know, even though we don't know the maintenance record on this truck, the fluid doesn't look that bad. So the transmission was probably serviced at some point not too long ago. Now, you could roll the dice and do a transmission fluid flush on this truck. You know, there's a 70–80% chance nothing will actually happen, and actually that transmission fluid flush will help prolong the transmission life on this car. But there's a 20–30% chance that, given the miles on this truck and the unknown maintenance history on this truck, maybe they just did one transmission service at 160,000 miles. Before that, they didn't do anything. Now, you do a complete transmission fluid flush, you know, some of that old debris and dirt from the old, you know, the clutch packs and stuff that was in one corner, that can get knocked loose and then plug things up and cause transmission problems. However, on both of these cars, you should be fine just replacing the transmission fluid that's inside the transmission oil pan with the oil filter, and nothing bad is gonna happen. Again, that's given you don't already have transmission issues. However, there's a scenario where I don't even recommend replacing the oil that's inside the oil pan, and that is, let's say on this truck where it almost has 200,000 miles, you check the oil, you obviously have no maintenance records, and you check the oil and you see that the oil is really dark. Now, even though the truck or the car might not have transmission issues, I don't recommend replacing the bit of oil that's inside the pan, even though, again, it might be only 20 or 30% of the oil that your transmission uses. But even by doing that, you run the risk of, you know, knocking, you know, debris and dirt loose inside the transmission, moving things around, and then causing things to plug up. And then you might actually start again having transmission problems where you didn't have any before. So that was on whether or not you should flush your transmission or not. Now, if you're wondering how you can maintain your engine and make sure it lasts for a very long time, I recommend you watch this video. I put a link to it in this corner. You can click on that, or you can watch this video as well. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.